Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we're taking a look at a Temur colored Tempo deck that features a lot of flying creatures to try and fly over all those ground blockers from the ramp decks. So let's get started here with our 1-drops, where we have lots of cheap removal spells, 3 copies of Fiery Impulse, so a nice and efficient removal spell, 2 damage to target creature, and 1 more thanks to Spell Mastery if we have that enabled. And then 1 copy of Clutch of Currents, just a nice tempo play for 1 mana. It is inherently card disadvantage, but if we do get to awaken it, we do get a 3/3 creature out of the deal, which can make up for that. Then we have a Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, just a very scary 2-drop that you can play, as he can quickly transform into Jace Telepath Unbound thanks to cards like Evolving Wilds getting into your graveyard, and once he transforms he can control the board with his +1 and flashback some instants or sorceries from your graveyard, so just all very good for just 2 mana, which is the crazy part. Then we have 4 copies of Welkin Tern. This is the 2-drop of choice here, as he can fly over for 2 points of damage every turn, a little bit vulnerable to some burn spells like Twin Bolt if you have multiples out, but that's the cost you have to pay for playing Welkin Tern and trying to punish some of the slower ramp decks, since they have a pretty hard time answering flyers if they don't have a red for the removal. We also have Skyrider Elf, which we can at most make into a 3/3, since we are not splashing any 4th or 5th colors just for Converge, since we want to keep our mana base as lean and mean as possible to try and survive all those acid mosses that are getting played. And playing more colors, of course, comes with some downsides. Then a few copies of Twin Bolt to punish the mono red decks, and also fine against the Thopter tokens. And as a last resort can just go upstairs to the opponent's face, or maybe in combination with combat damage you can get rid of some larger creatures as well. Then 3 copies of Pilgrim's Eye. I'm not too happy that we have to play this, but we are a 3-color deck and we are not playing Gatecreeper Vine since we want to do something else on our second turn. So Pilgrim's Eye at least offers us a 1/1 flyer that can search up our 2nd or 3rd color, but more importantly we're playing a lot of double blue and double red cards, so Pilgrim's Eye can also help us with finding maybe the 2nd mountain or the 2nd island to cast those 4-drop spells that we really want to play on curve, so Pilgrim's Eye can help us with that while still being a 1/1 flyer that can get in for a few points of damage here and there. Then we have the full amount of Eldrazi Skyspawner, which is another great flyer. 2/1 flyer for 3 mana that makes an Eldrazi Scion token, which we can then use to maybe ramp out a creature a turn earlier, or just add an additional 1/1 on the field that can attack, block, and so on. Also all the copies of Bounding Krasis as another efficient beat-down tempo creature, can tap down a blocker for a turn or can tap down an attacker before combat, so very versatile card, and just a 3/3 flash is already pretty efficient, as he can ambush some of the opponent's creatures if they don't respect the Bounding Krasis play, so just a very nice creature all around. Then 1 copy of Anchor to the Aether. Since we're not playing white, we can't play Royal Spout, but Anchor to the Aether is not a lot worse, since we still get to put a creature on top of its owner's library, so we're not down on any card advantage usually. And then Scry 1 can also help us find that final burn spell or that final flying creature that we need. Then 2 copies of Exquisite Firecraft, just another very efficient burn spell that can also go upstairs for 4 damage, or can just finish off a creature. And the Spell Mastery, of course, also relevant against the control decks. And as you can see, we have a nice variety here of instants and sorceries that we can flashback with our Jace when he transforms. Then moving on to our 4-drops, we have some very powerful cards like Whirler Rogue. Just a very efficient creature, a 2/2 that brings along 2 flying Thopter tokens, and the ability also relevant if we can make one of our beefy creatures unblockable for a turn. Then we have Akoum Firebird, another very nice aggressive creature, Flying Haste for 4 mana. Has to attack each turn if able, but that's usually not really a downside. And then the landfall ability here can also come up every now and then. If they remove the Firebird, you can keep getting it back if you have lots of lands. Then 2 copies of Pia Kiran, very similar to the Whirler Rogue, only the ability differs in that we can deal 2 damage to target creature or player if we sacrifice an artifact. And then we get to our big creatures here. 2 copies of Woodland Wanderer, can only be up to a 5/5, but a 5/5 Trample Vigilance for 4 mana is still a pretty nice deal, especially when backed up with removal and bounce spells. And then finally 1 copy of Guardian of Tazeem as another big flyer that can also lock down a creature for a turn if we have an island, or just tap 1 down for a turn if we need to get rid of a blocker. And then our mana base, 4 islands, 5 mountains, just 1 forest, 2 copies of Lumbering Falls, which can also turn into a creature and start attacking, 2 Cinder Glades, which synergize nicely with the following: Rootbound Crag, Hinterland Harbor, and Sulfur Falls. And then also the full amount of Evolving Wilds, since we do need the mana fixing, and in the first and second turns we're usually not playing all that many spells, so it's fine to have Evolving Wilds in this deck. So that's the deck, and now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look here at our opener, which looks very much acceptable. Good thing we have a mountain here, so our Crag and Sulfur Falls will come into play untapped, which is important. Don't have a 2-drop, but we do have Skyspawner or Pilgrim's Eye into some very powerful 4-drops. So here might as well run out the mountain, no real downside to it. Let's see what our opponent is up to. Evolving Wilds turn 1, not a surprising play. But let's see what it gets. An island, alright. So might be facing some counter spells this game, perhaps. Guess we can play out the Sulfur Falls and pass. And next turn... Alright, our opponent on a blue-black control deck maybe, with telling time for some card selection. So here I'm probably just gonna run out the Skyspawner, since we already have double red for Pia Kiran, so we don't really need to run out the Pilgrim's Eye to grab an island for Whirler Rogue, since we already have a turn 4 play lined up, and I would rather get more pressure on the board against the control deck. I don't think we need to worry about land destruction, so might as well run out the Rootbound Crag and pass the turn. And against the control deck you usually don't really want to sacrifice the Eldrazi Sign token, since the additional 1/1 can deal a lot of damage. Of course there are exceptions. Opponent casting Read the Bones, okay. So Scry to draw 2, deal 2 damage to himself. So the cards we have to worry about here are sweepers like Arising Miasma and or Languish, which means running out all these token generators is not great. But we see our opponent discarding an Angelic Edict, so they're probably running 3 or more colors at this point, which makes it a little less likely that they have Miasma and Languish, since they might also just have the Planar Outburst at 5 mana. So I probably will still play out one of our 4-drops. Now the question becomes which one. Let's attack first and then we'll figure it out. So I think we want to run out the Whirler Rogue here, since if we play Pia Kiran at some point later in the game, we might actually be able to use the ability right away. But actually, now that I look at our mana base, the Harbor won't come into play untapped, so we can't even play the Whirler Rogue this turn. So we don't really have the choice here. So I'm gonna play out Pia Kiran and hope our opponent doesn't play a sweeper. If they don't play a sweeper, I'm not gonna overextend into one, So we see a 4th land and a Sphinx's Tutelage, alright. So that's the opponent's win condition. And did not play a sweeper there. So here I'm more than happy to just play a land and attack with everyone. It's actually interesting because we could play the mountain, which together with the Eldrazi sign token gives us access to 2 Pia Kiran activations. So if our opponent does have a sweeper, we can still sacrifice the Scion and the 2 Thopters and deal additional points of damage to our opponent. But if we play the Hinterland Harbor, we could play the Whirler Rogue next turn. I think I want to keep up all the Pia Kiran activations, because it's pretty likely that our opponent will play a sweeper in the coming turn. So let's attack with everyone and keep up Pia Kiran activations, and then hopefully Exquisite Firecraft will be able to finish the job. Since 2 activations plus Exquisite Firecraft is lethal, of course we don't have any instants or sorceries in the graveyard, so the Firecraft could get countered. I guess a way around that is playing the Firecraft right now, but there are some ways for the opponent to gain life. So the opponent did have a Languish, so now we can sacrifice 1 Thopter, sacrifice another one, and now our opponent is tapped out. We have Firecraft in hand, so we should be able to win the game. Alright, so our opponent probably had the Languish last turn but opted to play the Tutelage instead, hoping we would overextend into the Languish. But luckily we had the Pia Kiran in play, which helped us play around a sweeper by dealing 4 additional points of damage, which certainly mattered this game. So on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which looks acceptable. Don't have any powerful 4-drops, but at least our lands work out pretty nicely here, since we can go turn 1 Cinder Glade, and then turn 2 Island, turn 3 Rootbound Crag, which will come into play untapped. So Pia Kiran, a nice draw, since we have Pilgrim's Eye to get the 4th land, and then Pia Kiran, a nice 4-drop. Opponent on banned colors, with a Gatecreeper Vine, getting a Rakdos Guildgate. Alright, so we're up against a 5-color deck. Let's just play out our Welkin Tern, and next turn Pilgrim's Eye most likely, and then Pia Kiran. So we still need double blue here. Not sure if we should play around an Acid Moss, because then we might want to get another red source, since if our opponent destroys a red source we can't cast the Pia Kiran anymore. Pilgrim's Eye actually very good here, since it can trade with our Welkin Tern. So let's take a look at our draw step, which is a Skyrider Elf. We could just play out the Skyrider Elf here. We could impulse the Eye, play a Skyrider Elf for 2 and attack. Could just play Skyrider Elf for 3, could play Pilgrim's Eye, so next turn we can play Pia Kiran. I don't hate impulsing the Pilgrim's Eye and getting in for 2 and play another 2/2 flyer here. Since I think against this deck we want to try and close out the game quickly, since if they're playing 4 or 5 colors, they probably have access to a lot of powerful cards. Yeah, let's go for it. Attack for 2. And also hope that our lands don't get destroyed here, since we would like to get up to 4 mana. So there's the Guildgate and another Gatecreeper Vine. Alright. So no threats from the opponent yet, just mana fixing. And if they're also playing all these colors, they probably have access to a lot of different sweeper effects. So probably don't want to overextend into them. So let's start by attacking, and I think we just play the Pilgrim's Eye, getting an island. I guess we could still get a mountain to play around an acid moss, but we still have a Skyspawner we can play regardless, even if the mountain gets destroyed. So I wouldn't mind acid moss too much here. Of course, at some point we would have to draw a second red source to play the Firecraft. Let's see, 5 mana, and it's going to be a planar outburst, alright. So now we can just follow it up with Pia Kiran. And we're starting to accumulate a lot of burn spells, so we have 8 damage in burn spells in our hand. So just need to connect a few times with our creatures and not have our opponent gain any life. And then we could try and win this game. But difficult to predict what our opponent is going to play here. Alright, Brilliant Spectrum. A nice card advantage and selection card in a multicolor deck. Let's see what they discard. Maybe we can deduce what they have in hand by what cards they discard. Alright, they just discarded 2 lands, so we can deduce that they have a bunch of lands in hand. Alright, let's go ahead and attack for 4. And here actually I don't want to play the Skyspawner since our opponent has double black, so they likely have more sweepers to come. So I would prefer to just keep up the Pia Kiran activation so we can sacrifice our Thopters in response to a sweeper, put our opponent to 8 and then try and finish them off with burn spells. Since if they don't gain life and don't counter our burn spells, we do just win here. So let's sacrifice Thopter, deal 2. Can also Twin Bolt the opponent down to 6 and then try and untap and burn them out. Alright, that's fine. Woodland Wanderer also fine, so Twin Bolt you down to 6, untap and Firecraft plus Twin Bolt you to 0. Make sure to tap our mana correctly here. That seems good. Alright. Sweet. On to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which looks alright. We have a turn 2 Welkin Tern, turn 3 Pilgrim's Eye, which can grab a green source, and then hopefully we draw into some of our bigger threats. Let's play a tapped Sulfur Falls here and pass a turn. So opponent on Salvage Drone, blue-black, looks like some sort of Eldrazi deck. And we will get 1 card exiled here. It's gonna be Sulfur Falls, alright, so happy that happened. Let's go ahead and play out our Welkin Tern. See if our opponent has a response, like horribly awry. Nope, just telling time. Giving the opponent some card selection. So they probably look like some sort of blue-black control deck. Still not sure. Salvage Drone, not the best card in a control shell, but I guess it blocks 1/1 creatures from the red decks. Alright, Grixis. So maybe a Grixis Eldrazi deck of sorts. If our opponent is on an Eldrazi deck, there's a lot of 3-drop Eldrazi, so I do expect them to play an Eldrazi if they're playing those. If they pass a turn, they probably are some sort of Grixis control deck, keeping up a counterspell. So here I like attacking for 2. And then playing the Pilgrim's Eye over the Skyspawner. Since if the Skyspawner gets countered, that's a little bit worse than the Pilgrim's Eye, even though we don't have the green source yet. Alright, interesting. Our opponent playing Altar's Reap. Sacrificing the Salvage Drone, discarding the Firebird. What is going on here? I have no idea. I mean, Salvage Drone plus Altar's Reap is kind of cute, but still. Maybe the opponent's playing a Sphinx's Tutelage deck, where they need a lot of card draw spells to trigger the Tutelage. I'm not sure. Keep drawing lands here, which isn't great. So let's hit for 3. And see. Alright, Fiery Impulse. Not as bad as Twin Bolt would have been here. So hit for 1, and I'm just gonna play out the Skyspawner, because otherwise we don't have anything going on. And play the forest that our opponent knows about, that we got with the Pilgrim's Eye. Alright, so next turn our opponent could get back the Firebird, which would do a good job of blocking our flyers, but of course the Firebird has to attack every turn. And would you look at that? We got our own Firebird, but our opponent also got a Twin Bolt, which can clean up our Skyspawner. Still not that bad for us. Our opponent paid 4 mana to cast a Twin Bolt, and we get a free Firebird. So I'm game. So here we can just play Lumbering Falls. Attack for 1. Still gonna hold on to the Firecraft. And then next turn play the Firebird. Hopefully our opponent can't exile it somehow, because then we're looking at lots of landfall triggers, unfortunately, which can keep getting back the Firebird if our opponent should just destroy it and not exile it. Necromantic Summons. That's unfortunate. So our opponent is just gonna steal our Firebird, so we can't get it back. And they have Spell Mastery. We're pretty unlucky. So our opponent now has a 5/5 Firebird. We can't kill it with the Firecraft. Opponent could get another Firebird next turn. This is gonna start hitting us for 8 every turn. What the hell happened this game? I guess we flooded out a bit. Pilgrim's Eye not gonna help. Firecraft not an instant, so we can't even kill the Firebird, plus blocking with the Pilgrim's Eye. So let's just fire up the Lumbering Falls and attack for 4, even though we're not winning the race. Nothing better we can do. Alright, so there's their own Firebird. Get in for 8, and next turn we have to keep back a blocker, otherwise we just die. Well, on turn 5 our opponent made a 5/5 flying haste creature, which is not bad. So here we can fire up the Lumbering Falls, attack for 3, put our opponent down to 9. And next turn we have to jump with the Pilgrim's Eye. Yeah, this is pretty ridiculous. Alright, GG's. Certainly one of the strangest games I've played. But yeah, let's move on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at a hand that I think I'm gonna mulligan, since it's pretty land heavy here. This one looks acceptable. Cinder Glade helps us play these untapped, which is nice. So we have Skyspawner into... Alright, even better. Now we also have a 2-drop. So we're looking at a nice curve of Welkin Tern into Skyspawner into one of our 4-drops. All thanks to this Cinder Glade being both a mountain and a forest. But our opponent, being on the play, has a pretty nice play here on turn 2. A lieutenant that's gonna get renowned. Alright, let's run out the Welkin Tern. Could have run out the Lumbering Falls, but I think I would rather get some damage out there. Opponent looking mono white so far, so they could have a number of enchantments they can put on their creatures, so if that's the case we wanna draw into some of our bound spells like Anchor to the Aether. Alright, let's run out the Skyspawner here. Could also Firecraft the Lieutenant, but don't really see a reason to quite yet. Would rather advance my board state, maybe kill something that's more of a threat. Since their opponent didn't have any plays and white doesn't really have any, or I should say many instants they can play on the opponent's turn. So I'm pretty happy just playing out some creatures. And alright, there we go. Our opponent has a red mana, Call of the Full Moon. So going all in on this Consul's Lieutenant, which means the Firecraft now is going to be pretty nice, since it'll kill the Lieutenant and basically be a 2-for-1. Could also just cast 2 spells in the same turn, so that the call falls off. But in mono white here, we don't have to worry about any pump spells the opponent might play to save the Lieutenant. So I think casting the Firecraft and playing Lumbering Falls is just fine here. So let's do that. Attack for 5. And next turn we can get in there with Firebird, maybe fire up the Lumbering Falls, maybe play Whirler Rogue or Skyspawner, lots of options. So 5th mana for the opponents. If they have a card like Archangel of Tithes, that could be pretty bad for us. Twin Bolt also very good for the opponent here, taking out our 2 flyers. But luckily we've got more where that came from. And if our opponent has a card like Reprisal, all our creatures are smaller than 4 power, at least the ones in hand. So here I don't hate running out the Firebird. Could also play Skyspawner plus Welkin Tern. Yeah, I think the Skyspawner plus Welkin Tern is slightly more mana efficient. And I don't expect my opponent to have a sweeper in this type of deck. Otherwise, playing the bird is slightly better since it can come back from the graveyard. So let's pass. See if our opponent has any plays. Because they haven't played that many cards this game. Maybe they have a bunch of enchantments but no creatures to put them on. That's one of the risks of playing auras. One of the many risks. Alright, it's gonna be a Glory Chaser on turn 6. Not the most impressive play. So now we get to follow up with Firebird. Get in for 7 in the air. +2 on the ground. And a Suppression Bonds on the Skyspawner is completely fine. So can't attack with it. So we could play Bird plus Rogue with the Scion tokens. I guess we can leave it as an option for the second main phase, since definitely attacking with the tokens here. So we would be replacing the 2 Scion tokens with 2 Thopter tokens and getting a 2/2. Seems worth it, since this doesn't look like a game that's gonna come down to card advantage. Otherwise, of course, keeping the Scion tokens can be important. Alright, pause the turn. So, barring a sweeper, I think we get there. Even a card like Archangel of Tithes wouldn't do it anymore, I think. Yep, looks like our opponent came to the same conclusion. Has their own Firebird, which don't really have to block at this point. And next turn we should be victorious. See if I can fire up the Lumbering Falls. Get in there with everyone. Alright, on to the next one. Alrighty, let's take a look at our opener, which unfortunately we have to mulligan, because we only have 1 land and we're on the play. This one looks decent, so I'm gonna keep. Play the Lumbering Falls turn 1 here, and next turn Island into Welkin Tern. Hopefully we draw a 3rd land that comes into play untapped, so we can play Skyspawner. Another option is just to play the Rootbound Crag tapped on turn 2, but I would really like to get the Welkin Tern out there. Alright, there we go. So now we can play Welkin Tern, next turn Skyspawner, and now we have a 2nd red source for the Pia and for the Firecraft. Still comes into play tapped, the Rootbound Crag that is. And we're facing a Blister Pod, which we don't really care about since most of our creatures have flying. So it could be a Sultai colored sacrifice deck. Here we can play Pilgrim's Eye, so we can play Pia Kiran next turn for sure. But I don't mind just playing the Skyspawner here, since that still gets 2 power of flying creatures in play, but does it a turn sooner. While I guess playing Pilgrim's Eye also puts 1 power of flying creature in play, but 2 is greater than 1. So pause the turn. And let's see what our opponent has here. Also a Skyspawner, alright. Fair enough. So Skyspawner blocks Skyspawner, I'm guessing. Still get in for 2. Also not blocking the Blister Pod should it attack. Firebird is a nice one for next turn. So let's attack with our flyers. Play Pilgrim's Eye. And our opponent could technically have land destruction, so I think I just get another red source since we have all these double red cards in hand. So next turn we can look at Firebird or Pia Kiran. Interestingly, our opponent didn't block with the Skyspawner. So maybe they're trying to race, or they have other plans for the Skyspawner. Sphinx's Tutelage, alright. Not a card I expected. We'll see if it works out for the opponent here. So they seem to be stuck on 3 mana. Could have a sweeper on 4. But seems weird to have a sweeper when you're playing all these creatures. So I'm just gonna jam the Firebird here, I think. Since playing Pia Kiran is a little better when we have more mana to maybe sacrifice creatures right away. And 3 is also greater than 2, and haste is also relevant since we get 3 damage in right away. Opponent mills us for 2. Plays a retreat to Kazandu. Does have a land to gain 2 life. Could have a 2 mana play with the sign token here. Opponent gets in for 2, so now he can just attack with everyone. And their opponent is actually just dead on board, so they must have a 2 mana play, otherwise this attack doesn't make any sense. But we also just have a Firecraft in hand, which can win the game. Could have also fired up the Lumbering Falls, but alright, they have a Fog, makes sense. So here we could add something like a Pilgrim's Eye to the board, which isn't a huge commitment. Get another red source. And pass the turn. Could Firecraft our opponent here, but doesn't seem quite necessary. So they must have a sweeper here, otherwise I don't see our opponent coming back. And that sweeper could be a Languish or a Rising Miasma. I guess they could also have another Fog. Alright, Blisterpot finally gets in there. Just gonna take it. Don't want to give my opponent an additional sign token when we can avoid it. Displacement to a 4/3 still leaves the Firebird in play. So now I kind of wish I had Firecrafted, since we could have activated Lumbering Falls and just won on the spot. I guess we still do activate the Lumbering Falls here. And then play Welkin Tern. And then next turn Firecraft will be lethal, even if our opponent gains 2 life with the retreat. Alright, sweet. They replay the Skyspawner. And Firecraft will be lethal here. So even if they have a Fog, that's not gonna help. Alright, I wanna thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this gameplay, and as always, have a nice day.